Hello, and welcome to the Handling and Storage Solutions discussion on forklift safety. My name is Simon Duddy. I'm editor of Handling and Storage Solutions magazine. And while forklift deaths have been steadily falling over the years, forklift injuries, they tend to be very serious. So this is a really key hotspot for warehousing and logistics. And to discuss this important topic today, we have Martin McVicker, CEO and co-founder of CombiLift, Sam Gray, Sales Training and Product Development Manager at Toyota Material Handling UK, Alexander Glassmacher, Managing Director of Elecon, and Stuart Taylor, Managing Director of Mentor Training. So, Alexander, sadly we still see a lot of forklift-related fatalities. For example, in 2016, at a third-party logistics company, there was a forklift collision in a V&A aisle, which led to the death of an operator. Can you tell us a little bit about what technology can do to prevent these incidents?
Yes, Simon, thank you very much for having me here in this group of industry professionals. With respect to V&A technology, or technology that prevents accidents from happening in very narrow aisles, let me start in Germany, if I may. In Germany, occupational law dictates that wherever you operate a fork truck, you have to have 50 centimeters to the right or to the left for a pedestrian to avoid a fork truck in a dangerous situation. In a V&A, as most of us know and who are aware of V&A truck operations, this is not possible. So in Germany, many years ago, there was a law that was instituted to say that if you want to operate a V&A warehouse or V&A racking or trucks in V&A very narrow aisles, you have to have either a mobile protection on a truck or a stationary protection that prevents either a truck and a pedestrian being in an aisle at the same time, or two trucks to be in an aisle at the same time. On the stationary side, what we do and have done in the past is to install infrared beams or infrared gates, we call them, that indicate whether there's already a pedestrian or a truck in the aisle, and then a second pedestrian or a pedestrian who enters who sees that a truck is already in the aisle will not enter the aisle, same with the second truck. On the mobile side, we mean the truck. On the truck, we install electronics with laser scanners that scan the front and the rear of the truck and can detect both pedestrians and other trucks and automatically slow those trucks down in a dangerous situation. That is the primary technology that is being used for V&A applications to prevent these types of fatal accidents, as you have just summarized, happening in the UK, unfortunately, in 2016.
And just to agree with Alex, we even know from a CombiLift perspective, the narrow aisle infrared beam on the aisle is a great way for a pedestrian walking in to know there is a forklift in that aisle, or even for another forklift operator that comes along, that at least they know not to enter that aisle. So, and it's very visual.
Yes, absolutely.
So the technology does exist and is well implemented, I would say, in structured V&A aisles within Germany. But I wouldn't say it's right across every warehouse, as I'm sure you would agree, Alex.
Yes, absolutely.
No, I mean, from a forklift manufacturing point of view, obviously safety is key to the business. But what we try and do is work with the third-party people like Elecon to promote safety within the warehouses. And there are many systems that we make ourselves, like our eyesight, such like, from safety point of view, but from a forklift manufacturing point of view, we can't cover every basis. So working in partnership with people is very, very important in this aspect.
Yeah, excellent. Well, it sounds like each warehouse demands its own safety solutions. And another thing that we've seen, Martin, is that a lot of manufacturers in particular are trying to get ride-on forklifts out of the operations altogether and move to pedestrian models where possible. I mean, can you tell us a little bit about this? Is it safety concerns that's driving that?
Yeah, we've seen, particularly within some of the larger manufacturing plants, that there's a real initiative at management level in businesses to move away from sit-down forklifts to pedestrian-operated forklifts in production areas where you have a lot of employees working, and also in areas like in DIY stores, like do-it-yourself, where you have customers in vicinity where forklift trucks are operating. So we see There's a real drive. Even in the UK market, Cummins is a great example as a manufacturer. They've made a decision to implement as many pedestrian vehicles as possible, Bodycote, another manufacturing plant. And we see that as a real trend that started a number of years ago, but we could see in the future that's really going to become more common. When you walk into production plants, you're going to see more pedestrian rather than sit-down forklifts. And I believe a lot of it's driven both by statistics, where if an operator is operating a pedestrian forklift truck, they have 360-degree vision of what they're doing. You know, they're more nimble. And because they're on the ground, they're more cautious in terms of their operation. You know, if you're operating a pedestrian forklift truck, you're not going to reverse the forklift back and hit it off a rack because you're in the vicinity where you're working. You're going to be more careful with other employees in the vicinity. So we see that as a real, what I would say, that becoming more common, not just in some of the larger manufacturing plants, but right across manufacturing plants in general, and businesses where customers are in the vicinity where forklift trucks are operating.
Yeah, I mean, there's no one-size solution for everybody these days because all the applications are completely different. One of the things that we see happening more and more now is a forkless society. So it's towing, it's pedestrian, it's people trying to take actual forks out of the area as much as possible and bringing in pedestrianised or towing applications rather than with the counterbalances and bits and pieces people use now.
Well, obviously you can see the safety benefit there, but are there any performance trade-offs?
Personally, you know, from the companies we've been dealing with, the first impression is you'll feel a pedestrian vehicle slower in terms of operation speed. But what you do find, many sit-down forklift operators, it's driving like a taxi. You know, they're driving around the plant, they're moving a pallet from A to B. Doesn't mean they're taking the shortest route. If you're operating a pedestrian vehicle, you're going to go the shortest route to do the task. So the performance level or productivity, you won't see very much difference from the plants we've been working with pedestrian equipment.
I mean, one of the things we did recently with one of our major customers is working alongside our T-Mote, which is a semi-automated order picking system. And we actually did a test where we did exactly the same pick manually, and then we did it through the T-Mote automation. And the T-Mote was far, far quicker, even though the operator wasn't jumping on and off the truck all the time, which is the issue. Stepping up, stepping down, you know, causes fatigue for the operator, but also introduces that slip, trips and falls scenario.
Yeah.
So if you've got the operator continually walking, carrying out their order picking, it's far safer for them and it's far quicker.
Okay.
I think as well, just picking up on a point Martin said, everything Martin said about 360 division is absolutely true and reduction in speed. I think one point to be careful of though is that using pedestrian trucks is not a way of encouraging interaction between pedestrians and pedestrian trucks because they can still carry a heavy load, they can still cause injury. And if you actually look at the breakdown of statistics, pedestrian trucks actually cause more injuries than ride-on trucks. They're not as headline grabbing and they're mainly lower limb injuries. However, they could still be life-changing injuries. So for any business that's going to move to pedestrian trucks, there are a lot of advantages, but not at the sake of safety and good safe systems of work in place and education of staff as well.
Are there any particular dangers then that you've perceived in terms of pedestrian trucks?
No, not at all. I'd agree with everything that's been said, but I think the message is don't think that you completely mitigate the risk of any injury by introducing pedestrian trucks. You still need to be very aware that there is a risk, and you still need to adjust your processes and approach to ensure that they're operated safely, and that includes segregating people and pedestrian trucks wherever possible.
Okay, so it's a question of complacency perhaps, or not perceiving the
I think it's perception potentially, not necessarily, but could be.
Okay. So there's a lot of focus on training the forklift operator, but it's the pedestrians in the warehouse that often bear the brunt of the incidents, and it's managers and supervisors that bear the responsibility for what happens in the warehouse. Do you think there needs to be a bit of a shift in emphasis in training?
Yes, absolutely right. Training is just one of the key elements that must be considered because, of course, when you consider safety around forklift truck, it needs to be an holistic approach. So, have we got the right level of training? Have we got the right processes and systems in place? Are we engaging with our staff to make sure they're communicated and understood? But ultimately, the key in all of this has got to be supervision and management. They have to be responsible for continually overseeing an operation. And there's various reasons why, but very close to something we're discussing at the moment is because forklifts are operated by people, and people can become complacent. They can be in different scenarios. You know, they don't work at their absolute best every single minute of every single day. So you do need good management and supervision, trained management and supervision to oversee that. We do think in the UK at the moment that's one of the key factors that's missing, which is why maybe our injury stats have remained pretty static over the last 4 or 5 years.
Do you think that some supervisors and managers can be a bit reluctant to intervene because perhaps they think, well, the forklift operators, they're their own breed, and I've never maybe driven a forklift before, so who am I to tell them how to do their job? Do you think that's it?
I think that's one part, absolutely. Traditionally, not always, but supervisors and managers probably came from the floor, so they may have been trained in the use of forklifts and they had a better general understanding. So absolutely, there may be that reluctance to discuss and communicate because they may not understand the risks and they may not even understand the right terminology, the components of a lift truck. So how do you have that conversation? Secondly, I think where managers have come from the floor, you've got to also question the general management training they receive from their employer. You know, we provide a specific course aimed at managers and supervisors, but that's the technical element of the requirements and the risk. What about how you engage people? How do you communicate with them? How do you discuss something in a non-confrontational way, in a positive way that actually gets good results? So I think that's an area that definitely needs to be considered and addressed. And of course, it has spin-off benefits because good management skills aren't just applicable to forklift operations, they're applicable throughout the business.
Okay, I think this would be a question for all of you guys. We'll start with you, Sam. Do you think that human error is still the key factor in safety?
There are certain things that drive certain cultures which can cause health and safety issues, particularly if, for instance, if you've got a customer where the operators are bonused on their pick rate or something like that.
Yeah.
The more they pick, the more they get paid. And health and safety can go by the wayside when it comes to bonuses. So yes, human interaction and human errors are definitely something we need to consider, but you can't engineer out the human factor completely. Even with automation, someone's got to be in a control room with automation. So there are definitely many things that you need to take into consideration when you're talking about the human error side of things.
You mentioned there about and the negative culture or some certain negative cultures that you might have in the warehouse. Could you tell, perhaps all the panel would like to give us some examples of those and how best to kind of foster a good culture?
Maybe I'm just coming back to the previous question, Simon, in terms of driver error. And I think the one thing is we as forklift manufacturers, we expect, and customers, we expect a lot from our forklift operators. We're expecting a forklift operator to sit on a piece of equipment, look at a load capacity chart and understand what they're lifting on a pallet. And we all know, depending on the goods that's on the pallet, the weight may vary. Some of the weights that are lifted may be a liquid form, so the load center is moving. But we're asking an operator to know what weight's on the pallet before they lift it. What's the load center of the weight? So we're asking an operator to do a lot mentally. So this, what Stuart mentions in terms of experience, is important. But I think us as the industry, we need to be adding more tools to the piece of equipment to make it easier for the operators to do their task. And one of the initiatives we've done in our business, we offer a system now called Combi Safe Lift. It's using a strain gauge system so that the forklift operator, if they overload it, they're getting a warning. Now, it's not rocket science, the technology we're using. It's been used in the construction industry for many years. You know, telescopic handlers have load monitors to know if the operator puts the telescopic boom out too far, if the stabilizing legs are not down. But the forklift truck industry as general, we don't have a mechanism for the forklift truck operator to be given the tool to make their task easier to know what they're lifting. And I think that's something that I can see could be a big improvement, not just in the UK, but to the forklift truck industry worldwide.
I mean, the thing is, we're sat here at the moment, we're talking about the operator, but a vast majority of accidents and injuries occur to the pedestrian. You take the classic example of a delivery driver drives his lorry into the yard and the forklift operator unloads the lorry. The driver of the truck is then exposed to the area and the application. So whilst we have just literally been concentrating on the operator there needs to be a culture and training for people visiting applications. One customer of ours, when a lorry comes into the yard, the forklift puts a frame against the driver's door and takes the keys away from the operator. So he can't get out of the lorry, but two, he can't move the lorry either. And he's then segregated away from the operating area. So you've got to look at the operator, but you've got to look at everybody else, the sort of 360-degree view of the application.
If I may look at this from the technology side, what we hear more and more from our customers is that the forklift operators are overloaded with new gadgets, with new technology to make their truck driving experience a better one. So we are very, very discussing with other companies in the industry how to improve technology and improve the man-to-machine interface, how to avoid distraction of new electronics that are installed on fork trucks to less distract operators from their actual task of safely driving their vehicle.
Just to pick up on a point from Alexander there, it's very interesting because when you provide basic training, you don't use all the additional attachments. So you use a very basic truck. So I do think that's something that might need to be considered. One of the challenges is, of course, they've got to be uniform across all trucks to be able to do that. But also then linking back to your point on culture, culture is a word we hear a lot and potentially is a bit of a throwaway word. And a good safety culture is actually one of the hardest things to achieve. And listening to Kamal Kandar from the HSE, I know his last presentation he gave, he's particularly frustrated because you can't create a culture from the bottom down. It's got to come from senior management, from the executive of a business. They don't have to implement anything personally, but they've got to buy into it. And quite often we'll see middle line managers with initiatives, and it cascades down from middle management to the shop floor, but it's very difficult for that continuation, and safety is continual. One thing people believe is we're going to create a good safety culture, we're going to invest in training, we're going to do some safe systems of work, and we're going to tick all these boxes. Then that folder gets put away in a cupboard. And of course it's not, it's continual, and a culture is about continually reviewing and continually trying to improve and really recognising the benefits, which aren't just safety related, of course. They're also there's lots of financial benefits in reducing accidents, and not just to people, in stock and buildings and racking, etc. So, culture, great word. Certainly in the UK, more needs to be done and buy-in from the executive level to ensure that actually develops.
Can I just add one thing to that? Because one of the things that we talk about quite a lot within Toyota, we've got some core values in Toyota. And one of them is Genchi Genbutsu, which is go to the source. And you mentioned about upper management buying into the culture. But quite a lot of the time, I think they're separated from it. So one of the things we say quite a lot within our business is go to the source. If you don't understand what's going on, go and have a look for yourself. You can't fix it sitting around a table in an office if the problem is down in the warehouse. Go down into the warehouse and have a look for yourself to see what the problem is.
And is it a problem that people are perhaps sometimes a bit afraid to speak up on the shop floor if they do spot a problem, or they perhaps don't have the confidence to articulate a worry?
I would say so, yes. You need to, again, and maybe Stuart can answer it with the basic training, but I think we need to make sure that people can talk without fear or retribution, be able to have a reporting system that is fair and works. Because if you've got middle and upper management that people are afraid of, depending on their management style, then it's quite difficult sometimes to actually go, excuse me, I think you've got that wrong, because they're afraid to do so. You want people to be able to say, actually, this is wrong, and this is why I think it's wrong. We teach all our sales guys within Toyota, whenever they're out and about doing site surveys and bits and pieces, if they see something that isn't correct, they're taught to bring it to the customer's attention, whether they're trying to sell them a piece of equipment, do some training or whatever. We use the term quite a lot, trusted advisor. Now, we always try to make sure that we do the right thing for the customer. And if it's pointing out, I'm sorry, Mr. Customer, but we believe that's a safety issue, then have the courage to do it. But be safe that Toyota will back you up when you do it.
Absolutely.
I do think, Simon, today, in the last 5 years, I think in the shop floor, forklift operators and pedestrians are more vocal about safety. People are more safety conscious. So I think the individuals in the operation do see what's happening. And I've noticed in our company, most business will have, in terms of near miss, records of near misses. But what we've implemented in our business, and I think a lot of companies, is we use the term good catch. So where nothing has happened, but trying to get operators and individuals to just look at a good catch in terms of what could have been a near miss.
Yeah.
And I think, coming back to Stuart's point about the culture, trying to develop that it's everyone's job to look for not look for near misses, look for good catches. And that sort of helps, hopefully, to develop that culture of safety.
That's your original question. I think one thing we would ask is, do people recognise what is suddenly bad practice? So therefore, hence they're not reporting it. And a lot of people who'll be watching this or reading the magazine may have never driven a truck before. And a forklift operator is, depending on his role, could be carrying out the same task thousands and thousands of times over a period of a month. It's extremely repetitive. And without the right sort of level of management, what was good practice before suddenly stops happening because they've done the same task thousands of times without any negative consequence. So that's also a risk that the people just get blind. We call it risk fade. The risk fades in their mind, and that's part of our biology and the way we're created. But I think, sort of referring really to Alexander's area of expertise, I know that a lot of the trucks now have systems on that can pick up issues before there's actually an accident. So things like overspeeding and impact, etc. I'm no expert on that area, but I'm sure good management could integrate that into their approach. So rather than wait for an accident or wait for something to be reported, actually management could be proactive. And I don't know what level that systems can do that, Alexander.
Yes, there are. We call them proximity detection systems, which enable a fork truck to recognize a pedestrian or a different truck predictively or preemptively. And there are, as we know from Toyota, fleet management systems today, iSight, EdoFleet, and several other fleet management systems out there today. And we are today looking at not in the future doing impact recording, but as you say, Stuart, predictive impact management in bringing those two systems together and ensuring that an impact is recognized before it actually occurs, is reported, and we believe that we can prevent 80% of those impacts that are today recorded by fleet management systems from actually happening. So the future is very exciting, and there's a lot of opportunity for new products.
And do you think that telematics, Sam, can be a really good tool then in helping to build safety culture?
I do, yeah. You may or may not be aware that 2019 is the 20th anniversary of SAS fitted on the Toyota trucks, which is a safety standard on our trucks, and it does all the work for the operator in the background. And we've stepped that up now with our telematics being as standard on our warehouse equipment that comes out of our Swedish factory. I think the forward movement with telematics in the future can only enhance that, and keeping the product live, so something that can be updated, something that can be reviewed on a regular basis and improved on a regular basis. People tend to buy a forklift for a 5-6 year period, but the only constant in life really is change, isn't it? But the forklift doesn't change. And in 5 years' time, they want something else, or their workload has changed. So with the telematics that we're offering, and lots of other companies offer as well, I can only see a positive coming out of that.
So you think that management will be able to use the stats and spot the trends and spot where perhaps the accidents are starting to build up, and then they could have a closer look at those processes and see.
I'll give you a very simple example. We had a customer who had eyesight on their vehicles, and there was a number of collisions detected in a particular area. On investigation, there were no collisions that happened whatsoever. It was a large expansion joint in the warehouse, and every time the trucks drove over it, it was giving the truck a large shock. So rather than actually saying that the customer had lots of damage and collisions, they didn't. It was just a case of, well, let's get some concrete or some tarmac, fill in the hole. So it was nothing to do with the trucks, but the telematics pointed out that there was something wrong with the application. And that's something that can be built on in the future. I know Alexander's probably got things he can't even talk about at the moment for the future, but it's very exciting.
I think, just going back to your original question, telematics, in my opinion, do not create a good culture. The culture has got to be there, that the business wants to use that for the right reason. And we both attended something recently where Kellogg's presented, and they'd put systems in place, yet the operators had covered over those systems, speed control systems, so they weren't in use. If you don't have a good safety culture or good management, you'll allow that to continue. So telematics are great as long as the company wants to use them correctly, and not just the senior level, it's got to be the operational management. So I think it's very important to work very closely with the company that's putting those in.
Yeah. So if I may expand on that, telematics, there are two major benefits from telematics: increase in fleet productivity and increased safety. And I don't know how it is at Toyota, but from our experience and the experience at my former employer, the primary reasons why telematic systems are bought to increase safety, to do impact management, to do pre-shift electronic or operational checks on an electronic checklist. And we do see a change in behavior through telematics, which is very positive with respect to safety. And that's why I believe, and congratulations, I just read on LinkedIn, 100,000 sites installed. Why telematic systems are so, the use of telematic systems on forklift trucks is growing quite significantly.
I think, Simon, telematics, it's a very useful tool, but if you bear in mind the telematics is only monitoring the forklift vehicle, so okay, and the forklift operator. But when we think of the pedestrians, coming back to Stuart's point about culture, coming back to pedestrians in that environment, I think telematics with a combination of some technology to the operators that's working in that vicinity. And I've come across recently a company in the Netherlands, and I'm sure maybe Alex, you offer something similar in your business, is that for the individuals, they wear like a wristband. And with the telematic system, that an individual knows that when they get within a certain distance of the forklift truck, it's like waiting for your restaurant table. It vibrates on your arm, or the forklift operator knows there's an individual. So I think the telematics added more to the individuals working in the vicinity, and maybe within Toyota you already offer some system like that. But I think that's where telematics as a base could be a great tool to build for safety in the surrounding area.
Yeah, so it's a powerful tool, but it's certainly not a replacement for a robust safety culture. Well, in 2017, a worker was killed by a forklift at a manufacturer in Birmingham. This employee was in a designated pedestrian area when she was hit, but the HSE found in their investigation that the inadequate measures were actually in place to safely segregate pedestrians. The firm was fined £200,000. And I just wanted to ask the panel, has enough progress been made on segregation between forklifts and pedestrians?
I think the stats say about 57% of injuries are actually to pedestrians as a result of forklifts, so clearly not. But the sites we visit, it's a really mixed picture. So you'll have some sites that will have excellent physical segregation, some sites where that's not practicable, so they'll have good other systems in place as well. I think the key is, one, it should be in place, but it's about following it. Because it doesn't matter what you've got in place, we are hardwired as people to take shortcuts. So I think there's a lot of talk now about putting walkways in a natural way that we would walk. So, but unfortunately, that generally means cut the corner. So it's not always practical, but it's good that there's more recognition of that. But certainly, you've got to have a system in place. It's got to be understood by everyone. And I do think there's a strong argument for training everybody in your business about the dangers of forklift trucks, because we all can become quite complacent when we're working near them continually. And that also includes people who don't often visit the site. Or maybe they work in an office and they're not often in the warehouse, because they seem to be a greater risk as well, because they're not familiar. So there's a lot of good things happen with segregation, but again, putting barriers in is not a fix on its own. You've got to have a system and you've got to maintain it and you've got to educate people continually.
So I'm just going back to something that Stuart mentioned earlier, and it's a safety culture. And we spend a lot of time and money training our forklift operators to use the equipment as safely as possible. But how much time and effort do we spend on the pedestrians? How much time and effort do we spend on training the pedestrians that actually this is the safest way to move around the warehouse, the application? So I think no, there's not enough that's been done yet. I think there's plenty more that can be done. The blue sky theory would be complete segregation, but it doesn't work. So for me, that's where you start. Complete segregation, can we achieve that and still be productive? Yes or no? And then you move to the point where you've got that balance, where you've got the right amount of safety without compromising the business. And I think that's where a lot of people look at it in that way.
So is it easier to do that with a greenfield site as opposed to a site that's been up and running for a few years?
You have to have a very large wallet as well, don't you, at the end of the day? Yes, everything can be bought, fixed or solved, but it has a price. And when price, unfortunately, comes into the conversation, it has an effect with people on the culture and the application.
I do think greenfield site or an existing facility, a lot of operate, you even take the e-commerce business, there's the number of SKUs are increasing on a monthly basis. So there's going to always be interaction between pedestrians and forklift trucks. It's going to be very hard to eliminate completely. And I think one trend we've seen in the last 10 years with the growth of electric forklift trucks, the pedestrians now don't hear the vehicle. While if you take 10 years plus where you had all AC trucks, the individual would hear the forklift truck coming towards them. With electric vehicles, I think audible alarms, in my opinion, are probably not loud enough, or they're only in a single direction, because a forklift truck, as we all know, even when it's turning, it might be reversing, but it can be turning 90 degrees. And so audible alarms, I think, need to be increased. Like we've heard this in the electric car industry, safety of the electric vehicles is going to be a concern. And the forklift truck industry, particularly in the warehousing sector, it's gone predominantly electric. And that's a challenge where operators don't hear the vehicle coming closer. And I think there's a lot we could do with minimum cost in that regard.
I think Alexander may be able to expand on this a lot more for me, but I've noticed also in the last couple of 3 years, visual aids are far more apparent now than audible ones. Because if you walk through a car park in a supermarket and a car alarm goes off, how many people actually take notice of that car alarm? Whereas if a light or a barrier or something crosses your path, you can't help but notice it.
Yes, we've seen a lot of visual alarm systems come out. We also have a lot of trouble with false alarms. So we're speaking about proximity detection systems being able to detect the pedestrian in the next aisle over. And many customers do not want that. They have too many false alarms going off. So that is a very big challenge in engineering these types of electronic products. But we also see, if I may go from fork trucks to mobile robots, applications, as Martin said, there are business processes. If we look at stock picking, where pedestrians and mobile robots or fork trucks will always be in the vicinity or will always be working together, there are requirements where we can take proximity detection systems, install them on mobile robots, for mobile robots to be able to work faster in the vicinity of pedestrians. There are certain regulations in Germany where if they work together with pedestrians, they are only allowed to work at a certain speed. And if they have a pedestrian detection system, they can work at a higher speed and become more productive. So moving a little bit away from fork trucks, I hope that's okay. The whole area of automated guided vehicles, mobile picking robots is very, very exciting and very important also with respect to safety in the warehouse. We see more and more accidents happening with AGVs or mobile robots also.
Okay. So, I mean, do you think that requires a specific or a different kind of type of solution? Or can the solutions that we use for forklifts be ported over?
I think they're going to be ported over. We already today have certain pilot installations where we install our system both on fork trucks and mobile robots, because in many business applications, they work alongside one another.
Okay. So what else do you see in the future of forklift and warehouse safety technology, Alexander?
I think it's an extremely exciting part of the industry, particularly because we are participating from the effects of two megatrends. One of them is digitization, and the other one is autonomous driving. And we see a lot of opportunities, new sensor technologies coming out from autonomous driving that we can use one-to-one in creating new product solutions in the fork truck industry. We see improvements or trends in improving man-to-machine interface in the vehicle, in the car, and we're trying to carry those over into application in the fork truck industry. And the most important thing that I see with respect to the future of such technologies in the fork truck industry is cost degression. Today, many of these products, we mentioned it earlier, are cost prohibitive. They cost too much. But as soon as we see the legalization and the widespread commercialization of autonomous vehicles, many of the sensors that are today used in autonomous vehicles or in autonomous vehicle applications will significantly be reduced in price. And in 5 or 10 years, we believe that it will be as common to have warning systems and safety systems in fork trucks as we today see in the vehicles that we drive on the road. So it's very exciting. There's a lot of opportunity to create great new products which will continuously drive safety in the warehouse.
Okay.
I would like people potentially watching this, so there are practical measures, certainly in a smaller operation as well, that people can take. And you'll often go into a site and they won't have the basics in place. So there's also a possibility to start there. And that could be having real one-way systems that people actually use, having mirrors on blind corners, putting a barrier in front of a door where people come in and out of the warehouse to slow them down. So a lot of actual very basic practice that have been around for a long time that people still don't invest in. So I think for me, in the smaller operation particularly, it's about recognising the risk first of all. Because if you don't recognise the risk, you won't do anything at all about it.
Okay, thanks, Stuart. So Sam, do you want to say anything about how Toyota sees the future of forklift and warehouse safety?
Yeah, so like I said, looking at the future with our warehouse equipment being standardised with telematics, as like our SAS system was, the future is exciting. I think it's going to be complicated as well. As Alexander was saying earlier on, people talk about price a lot of the time. And Stuart was saying, people talk about culture. Sometimes it's a throwaway word. If the culture is not right and the equipment is not used correctly in the correct way, there are always, unfortunately, going to be issues because we as humans inherently add those issues. So there's no magic wand for this.
Sure.
There's definitely not a magic wand. I think we're going in the right direction. I definitely think we're going in the right direction with what we're doing. And I can't wait to see where we get with it.
Okay, great. And I suppose maybe Simon, just to add in terms of, safety in the workplace, I find with forklift trucks, they're rated for certain capacities. And I find one of the leading contributions to accidents is if you have operator trying to lift 2 pallets together, which is back to Stuart, some of the basics. Yeah. And we've noticed now in terms of some of our clients where we're actually putting visual decals on the product, 1 lift, 1 load. Yep. I know you might say it's so basic, but forklift truck operators, they try to get the job done as quickly as possible so that 2 half pallets, they lift 1, set it on the other, and we all know the challenges that brings. So there is a lot of basics that can be done at the ground level, But I think even the awareness in the UK of health and safety, it's become very, I don't think it's just at management level, but I feel on the shop floor, health and safety it's becoming everyone's attention. But I think coming back to in terms of trying to identify some of the risks, as Stuart said, get them identified, because there is solutions around many of these risks without a lot of cost for all businesses today. And I mean, I know there's some of them are going to cost more, but there is a lot of you can implement a lot at very little cost to improve the safety of operations.
Mm-hmm.
And quite a lot of accidents concern unconventional loads. I mean, recently we saw an incident when 2 forklifts were attempting to lift a load of rebar, and they dropped it and they hit the banksman. And what do you think can be done with this kind of incident, Martin?
Well, I think at Combilift we mustn't be doing enough marketing, because if you take the challenge of 2 forklifts lifting any load is not good practice in any business environment. And rebar, as we all know, is a long product, so it needs to be spec'd out that you have 1 forklift to lift a single load. And I mean, I know from a Combilift perspective, we have multi-directional vehicles that can lift long product and travel laterally. So that would be, if you call it, the best solution for that scenario. But I think it's a non-runner to have 2 forklifts lifting any kind of load. And I even had an example in the US about 7 or 8 years ago, where we had a company were using 4 forklift trucks to lift a complete truckload of structural steel. So they were preparing the full truckload at ground level, 2 forklifts coming on each side, lift the full truckload, reverse the trailer underneath. And we can all imagine the what could happen there when you have 4 forklift operators doing their own operation. But what it would, like handling that example of rebar, I think it's 1 forklift per load would solve any of them scenarios. But the other thing we have noticed both in the US and UK and Australia is incidents that can occur with preparing truckloads of unusual product. So if we take that example of rebar steel, if you're either loading a truckload of structural steel or rebar steel long goods, pedestrians getting on top of the truck to put in maybe skids or bearers to prepare the next pack. So the whole drive towards operators not being on top of truck bodies is definitely is critical. And I know there is health and safety requirements here in the UK that you should not be above ground level while you're doing your task. So I think there's a lot of equipment out there today that allows operations like that to take place. Like I know even from a Combilift perspective, we've developed the straddle carrier, which can lift full truckloads. So it allows clients to prepare the full truckload ground level, lifted with 1 vehicle, single lift. But I think that what we've seen other clients have done is they've implemented added walkways either side of the trucks, so the individuals are not climbing up to check loads, even strapping the product on the trailer. So that whole area of preparing the truck for transport, climbing up, putting straps over, that's really a safety concern. And it's, if you visit a lot of clients that's handling awkward goods, that's still very common practice here in the UK. And I think there's a lot could be done to prepare the unusual loads more safely. But I think to answer your question, 1 truck per load, no matter what the length or weight of the load is the most safe way to handle any product.
I think it's about having a truck that's fit for the purpose.
Fit for the purpose, correct.
Absolutely, it's all down to a risk assessment, isn't it? Whilst there may be a safety culture in place, and we keep using the word safety culture, but whilst there may be one in place, it doesn't stop or hurt anybody to do a 1 or 2 minute risk assessment. What we're doing, is it the right thing to do with the right piece of equipment? Let's just take a step and check what we're doing. That doesn't cost any money, and that can potentially, in that instance, it could have saved the injury.
Was that the problem then? There perhaps there is a risk assessment for 95% of the work that's being done, but every now and again, an unconventional load might come in, and perhaps the employees don't quite know how to handle it, and they just try to fudge it.
Well, they should be able to then say, okay, we've never had this load in before, we've never handled this load before, so let's just take I'm going to be flippant, let's take 5 minutes and think about this. What's the best way of handling this load at the moment? Do we have the equipment to handle this load?
Yes, I don't know the particular case, but why lots of things wrong. Why use 2 trucks? All forklift operators are trained, if they have accredited training, how to assess and handle the load. They're also trained what to do if there's an unfamiliar load as well.
Yeah.
So, but of course you can't just put this on the forklift operator. The big question for me is, why was there a person in proximity of the load? Because regardless of what else is wrong, and accidents generally never one thing, they're a combination of many. If that individual was not in the vicinity of the load and there's no requirement that they should be, we wouldn't be having this discussion now, because the worst case scenario, the load would have been dropped. I don't think rebar gets damaged very easily, but if it did, that's the worst case scenario. So it's about ensuring that employers and management understand the importance of keeping people away from forklift trucks. And loading and unloading, we've seen 3 major accidents over the last year where drivers have been injured, and often on curtain siders, where they're multi-drop and the driver will hold the curtain to the point, because they're quite difficult to pull back, to allow the forklift operator to take the load off. And if there's an issue with the load, your natural reaction is to try and help. Going back to what you said earlier, a great idea about the cage on the door. The driver should not be near the forklift truck. People should not be near forklift trucks. Not in that, especially in a loading and unloading situation.
And I think one thing, Simon, that example of the rebar, if you look across manufacturing across the UK, you either, a lot of companies maybe take in long product, for instance, a window manufacturer taking in long goods to make finished windows, or they're taking in pallet raw material and they're making physical products. So handling awkward loads is more common than we realise. It doesn't mean it's a big percentage of the handling, but even if it's only 3 or 5% of what needs to be handled, the whole risk assessment is key. How can this be done safely?
Well, quite a lot of incidents sadly involve agency workers and new starters. What can companies do to protect those who are most vulnerable in the warehouse, Stuart?
It's a great point, because statistically, and this is averaging, new workers are something like 3 times more likely to have an accident in the first 6 months of their employment. So their definite consideration should be made for them. And the law makes it absolutely clear. Agency workers have the same, or you should apply exactly the same controls, exactly the same system to an agency worker and any visitor as your full-time employees. So the law is very, very clear on that. From a forklift and a training perspective, we often see situations where an agency worker will come into site, their credentials aren't checked, so do they have appropriate training for that type of truck? But even if they do, are you actually telling them more about your operation, or as much about your operation as they need to know? Now, they're getting too boring and technical. There are 3 stages to forklift training. You have the basic training, which is in a controlled environment, off the job, and then you have job-specific and familiarization training. And those 2 second elements aren't something a company like us would do. That's something you could do in-house with a competent person. So it could be a trusted person within your own operation. And it's about making sure they understand your layout, your systems, your emergency processes, if you have any gradients, for instance. Also your load types as well. They may be an experienced truck driver, but are they used to handling your specific load? So really it's applying what they know, but actually on the job. And it doesn't have to be an extensive period of time. It very much depends on the operation. So just by investing a little bit more time in them, to ensure you check the qualification, that potentially you assess them as well, short assessment, and then spend some time with them so they understand your business, your policies, and how your business works, can make an enormous difference. And I think the irony for me is that obviously agency workers are generally brought in at peak times, when you're at your busiest, where you don't want to have issues and accidents and disruptive damage, because it affects your productivity and your efficiency. So that little bit of upfront investment in doing some additional training and familiarization training can have real financial benefits and make you more productive, as well as reduce the risk of accidents.
And some of the truck systems that you can find on forklifts today, for instance, the Toyota eyesight, what we can do with peak times of the year and agency staff is you can actually program the trucks to have a completely different set of parameters in it in comparison to your regular staff. So you might have some people programmed in as driver parameter 1 or driver parameter 2, and those two different parameters, I mean, the agency drivers can be on a parameter that's far slower and far more comfortable for them to drive, because whilst they may have a forklift license, they may have taken it on truck A, but they're now driving truck B. You know, people say a forklift's a forklift. Not technically true, because the way the driving characteristics, the controls, the pedals, they can all be slightly different. So if you've got agency staff coming in, if you've got a telematics system or something on the truck, you can control the truck characteristics better than just letting people loose on something that's set up for your regular users.
Well, it's interesting you mentioned peak there, Stuart. I'd like to put it to the panel with peak season very much ramping up at the moment. What tips would you have for people who are running warehouses to try to keep, in a very busy time, to try to keep safety front of mind and minimise incidents?
I mean, it might sound like a simple recommendation, but I think, you know, we all agree in a peak we need maybe more forklift operators. But my suggestion would be, within your organisation, if you have existing operators, maybe try and move them more towards operating the forklift truck, and the agency workers should take in for some of the other tasks. Because I find taking in an agency worker to operate a forklift truck, particularly, you know, as you mentioned, forklift truck A is going to be different to B. And in a peak time, everyone's under pressure. It's definitely a high risk environment. I think, Stuart, you mentioned 3 times more likely of an incident to occur. So my recommendation is try and use your pool of people where possible, move them more towards the forklift truck operation and take in agency workers for other tasks. But that's easier said than done, I can imagine, depending on the warehouse that you're working in.
Yeah, I mean, if you've got a fleet of vehicles in your business or your application, and you are getting in extra vehicles, try and, if those extra vehicles you're bringing in, try and make them akin to the ones you've got. Because if you start bringing in a mixed fleet, you're adding in that potential, I'm getting off truck A and getting on truck B, and there could be some slight operator differences on the truck. So you're adding issues in there for the operators.
I have little experience with agency workers, but I would recommend to, if you do hire agency workers to have to operate foot trucks, to also ensure that you have a dedicated safety employee to take care of the agency workers and to provide special supervision for accidents not to occur through the use of agency workers.
I would echo that as well. Invest a little bit of time in checking their qualification, some minor assessment or some assessment of them, and understanding they know your business and the way your business works. And there will be a requirement for additional supervision, especially if agency workers don't necessarily have English as a first language as well. Mm-hmm. So absolutely.
I suppose the pressure will be very much on to get people operating as quickly as possible, though. Do you think that's just simply short-sighted?
Well, definitely. If you consider, you may have that situation. Let's not talk about injuries, but if you have an agency worker that loses a load in the middle of an aisle, no one's hurt. You might have the cost of stock as an issue, but how does that affect your operation? What about those other pick locations that you can't get to? What does it block the whole aisle off? How much time? And it's difficult to measure time, of course, but is that really productive compared to a little bit of investment and, reiterating what Alexander said, some supervision of them, some additional supervision? That's why I use the word invest.
Yeah, but I think you're talking about the on cost as well. You know, we're not talking about injuries, we're not talking about anything like that. We're just talking about incidents which produce on costs. And if you do lose a pallet in the middle of an aisle, like you say, there is time that you need to clear the aisle, put everything away, but it's the amount of time that people can't actually get and carry on doing what they're doing. So they have to go left, go right, whatever, go to a separate aisle, or they have to stop what they're doing until everything's sorted out. So there's no injury involved, but there is an on cost when there are incidents. And like Stuart said, you know, if there's that little bit of investment up front, or a health and safety person involved for the agency staff, it can only be a good thing. But one of the things Stuart said, obviously, as well, is if English isn't the first language, then it becomes even more difficult. And one of the customers we've got in the south, they have multiple languages in their distribution centre, and I'm quite happy to say that they have multiple instructors, as their languages are their first language of other countries. So that for me is a positive.
We've spoken a little bit about price and the cost of safety systems, but I mean, if you do have an effective system in place, it's not only just going to drive down incidents, it's also going to have some knock-on benefits for the operation. Can you tell me a little bit more about what those might be? And
we've touched on some of them already, haven't we? You know, you've got damage to stock, which could be many hundreds and hundreds of thousands of pounds through even one operation. And we had a customer that they had an acceptable damage limit per month. And I think it was about £100,000. And we asked them, why is it acceptable? 100,000, and they said, because that's what it's always been. You know, so in a tight economy and where margins are slim, we thought that would make a big difference. So racking damage to the trucks, which these guys will be able to talk about a lot more, and lost time. What about lost deliveries in terms of your relationship with your customer, especially now where deliveries are expected to be with the, probably can't use a company name, but people expect next day delivery. Now, what effect does that have? Let alone the lost working time as well.
If you take into the consideration the cost of your operation and a forklift, about 70% of the cost is down to the actual operator. So again, touching on things that we've touched before, particularly Stuart was saying, it's the investment of the safety culture up front. If you get that right and you maintain it, then you're only going to drive down your non-related costs, your damage, your incidents. You've got to make sure that the culture's right. You've got to make sure the training's right, to make sure that your productivity doesn't get hit by reoccurring incidents.
I think as well that the reputational issue is becoming more. I'm too old to really talk about social media, but I do know that if there's an incident or an issue, it's everywhere extremely quickly. And people like to pick up on the bigger names of businesses, and with the new sentencing guidelines, the fines are, they're headline-grabbing news. So that's also an issue that you could, especially if you're in a consumer environment, or providing to the consumer environment, it could have a damaging effect on your reputation, which of course will cost your business as well. So it's definitely worth considering.
I would say, if I take from a Combilift perspective, our DNA, we're 21 years in business, but we develop products around handling, or initially around awkward load handling, and it's very safety driven. But when you look at the analysis is, in terms of, it will be maybe a little bit extra upfront cost, but handling, if you take, in terms of doing risk assessment on handling awkward long goods, the procedure that it's going to take to do risk assessment, rather than having the right piece of equipment to handle them awkward long goods, the investment is very worthwhile. And the other thing, coming back to the product damage, like I've even several examples in the UK of structural steel fabricators that are preparing full truckloads of structural steel, but by now having the ability that they can prepare the full truckload at ground level, come along with a Combilift straddle carrier, lift it in one lift in a matter of a few minutes. It's efficient, but the main big benefit, which they didn't realise early on, was product damage. Because as we all know, every time you lift a piece of product with a forklift truck, you're potentially creating damage. And when you're handling non-uniform loads, the amount of times they're handled in a manufacturing plant, can be countless. So having the right way to handle that can actually be more productive and save the money and improve the safety. And we all know safety does bring efficiency long term, and when you're more efficient, is profitability. So I think it's a win-win to focus on safety, because I often look at safety and lean are very intertwined. We often hear in business that we want to run a lean operation, but one of the simple philosophies of lean is everything should have a place and everything should be in its place. But that automatically creates a safety culture as well. So there's very intertwined efficiency and safety.
So just picking up on your point there, Martin, I think there's real clear evidence that people don't like working in an unsafe environment. And there's absolutely clear links to if you feel safe and your productivity. So, it's really simple. If you are a productive, safe environment, you will be more efficient in your operation. And not just in terms of output from your team, but also in terms of things like recruitment. You have less turnover of staff, your management time's not invested in retraining people and recruiting people. So, like you said, everything is interlinked, and it really is holistic. It's lots of different spokes that create that more efficient, safer environment.
Interesting.
So what we do, Simon, we compare safety in our company often to quality control. Quality control in many companies takes a back seat. It's very unpopular. So the most important thing to drive safety is to have it driven by management and having it go top down. If management does not identify with quality control, does not support the quality control engineers, quality is going to suffer. And I think it's very similar in any organization that has to deal with safety. And for us personally, the most important thing about safety and the benefits of safety is driving down fatal accidents and serious injury accidents. If I look at the statistics in Germany and in the United States, I don't know the statistics in the UK off the top of my head right now, but there are too many people every year dying because of forklift instigated accidents, and many, many people carrying away serious injuries. And we as organization of logistics need to work daily on driving down those accidents.
Excellent. Well, we've touched on it briefly, but fines and sentencing guidelines have changed in the last few years. So fines for incidents and fatalities have risen very sharply in recent years. What impact has that had on the forklift safety landscape as far as you can see?
I think companies are more aware. I mean, interestingly, I asked the HSE lead, and he definitely felt that it had an impact, and mainly because it also appears in the press.
Mm-hmm.
But I think what the interesting thing is, yes, it's having an impact, but it's that question of, oh, that's always someone else. It will never happen to me.
Mm-hmm.
So we see that as well. Oh, that was someone else's issue. That won't happen to us. It was a one-off. So I'm not sure it's having the impact that it should do yet.
Okay.
From a personal point of view, I don't think that, like you say, it's appearing in the press, but I don't think it's reported enough. You mentioned earlier on, like the near-miss culture, and I don't think incidents in our industry are reported enough and widely enough.
It's interesting. You'd think money would be a catalyst for bigger organisations, especially we talk about trying to get buy-in from the exec, because that's something they're always extremely interested in. But actually, one of the FLTA safety ambassadors, Lisa Ramos, is someone whose leg was injured, and she had a life-changing injury. And I often think that those stories are more powerful than the financial, because people relate to themselves in that situation, the effect it had on her, but also on her family as well. So, yeah, I agree that it would be great to see incidents reported more widely, but I think the human stories should also be encouraged to come out of this, because very often they don't even make the news. Someone's leg was run over. What does that mean? Well, actually, it means someone's life is changed forever. They have, their leg amputated. The effect it had on their family and their ongoing life as well, the battle they have. And I think when you hear stories like that, it makes you think. And I think people like Lisa should be appearing in more bigger companies more often to tell their story, because I think it certainly had a lasting effect on me.
That's a great valid point.
We have found, I know it depends on the sector, but if you take the oil and gas, to me, that's one sector where safety is really the top of everyone's agenda. But if you look at three markets we do quite a lot of business to, the UK, Australia and the US, and we all know that the US safety, everyone talks about it, but out of doing business in the three markets, in our opinion, Australia ranks top in terms of safety, forklift truck operator, pedestrian. And I think we could learn a lot just by looking at some of the models within Australia, because to my opinion, the UK would be number 2 and the US number 3, but I think Australia would be top of the rank in terms of a safety-driven culture.
So thanks very much to all of our panellists today. Would you like to summarise, Martin?
So, no, first of all, thanks very much for this initiative today here, Simon, to get myself and a group of peers around the table, because safety is really top of all our agendas, and it's the top of everyone. It doesn't matter whether you're a forklift top operator, a pedestrian in the warehouse, or a manager in a company. because we all want our employees to go home from work the way they came to work. And I think this initiative just highlights some of the improvements that we can all bring to the table. And I've no doubt with technology, there's a lot more we can do as an organisation, a group, right from training and with technology for the future. So thanks very much, Simon.
No, I'd just like to reiterate some of the things that Martin has just said. Thanks for putting this together. I found this really, really interesting. And I know we've talked about the future of our industry being quite exciting with the technology and things that are coming up. But what we can't forget is the past and the basics. And we need to make sure that we all keep a 360-degree view over the safety and the health of what we do on a day-to-day basis, be it as a pedestrian, be it a forklift operator, be it flying in today on an aeroplane, be it driving here in a car today in the weather. You know, safety has to be at the forefront of everything we do.
Yes, let me also thank you, Simon, very much for having me over here from Germany. I found this a very, very interesting roundtable discussion. On a daily basis, through changing the culture of every enterprise, and also by using technologies, driving towards zero accidents happening in operating fork trucks, whether it be fork truck operators or pedestrians. That's what we live daily. It's a very, very exciting time that we're in, because technology is a big enabler in making this happening.
Yeah, thank you, Simon. Great initiative, and I hope this happens again, and I hope that it's a real success with your readers, because that way we can help spread the word and the message. So my summary would be very simple. At a senior level, recognise the risk and make some basic investment in your business. There are obviously great moral advantages to that, but there's also great financial benefits as well. A lot of things you can do are very, very straightforward and simple, and they're not necessarily financially prohibitive, but you need to recognise it and you need to make the effort. And do it every single day. It's a continuous process. It's not a project that you then put away. So something you do every single day, like you would in terms of driving your profit.
Okay, well, thanks very much to all of our panellists today, and thanks very much for watching. Goodbye.